And this has really thrown the typical talking points about, oh, we just need more officers on the scene, we need more people with guns, because how many quote-unquote good guys with guns were there and allowed this to unfold? So this isn't to take away from the broader question of how do we make it so there are fewer incidences where cops are faced with a massacring madman armed with an AR-15. And I do want to say, you know, in terms of the sort of fatalism around this debate, which is always like, oh, God, we have the same fucking debate and nothing ever changes. You know, in Florida, they did actually pass, and Florida is basically a red state at this point, they did pass a red flag law, which, you know, listen, this type of violence is probably the most difficult to curb, where you have an individual who, this is something else we learned more details of, was clearly disturbed.
Yeah, why don't we get into that? Let's put this up there.
Clearly disturbed individual. I mean, every interaction that anyone had with him was bizarre. There was one former friend who said he showed up with all these cuts all over his face, and he had said it was from a cat, and then he admitted that he had taken a knife to his own face. You know, total blowout fights with his mom, where the cops were called repeatedly. And
multiple times to his house.
Multiple times, and also with his grandmother, reports of multiple fist fights. People at Wendy's, where he worked, saying, you know, this guy, he wouldn't talk to anyone, or he'd blow up at people and threaten violence. I mean, this was someone who every single warning sign was there that he was disturbed. But what makes it difficult is, you know, in Texas in particular, if you aren't a convicted felon, or if you haven't been like basically institutionalized for mental health issues, then, you know, you can go free and clear and on his 18th birthday, get the background check and get the firearm, no problem. The idea with red flag laws is that there would be a process in place that if you have those really clear signs of trouble, you can go through a court process to put someone's name on a list so that they are barred for a period of time from purchasing a firearm. Now, obviously, you have to write that law very carefully to make sure that people's rights, as recognized by the Supreme Court anyway, are protected. But that is what they did in Florida. There are, I think, 19 states that have those type of red flag laws. That seems to me to be one of the potential ways that you could at least, listen, you're never, without taking every gun out of society, which I think we both agree is just never going to happen, you're not going to end these mass shooting or the amount of violence in our society, period. But
it's a difficult one,
something like that could potentially curb things on the margins. And one other thing I want to say about this, and we're going to talk about the Democratic response as well, which is typically, you know, pathetic and nonsensical, but a lot of frequently, and Abbott is certainly doing this in Texas, rather than contemplate any, you know, universal background checks or any of the things that are sort of like broadly accepted and popular and get floated every time we have one of these incidents, they say, well, we need more mental health services. Agreed. Totally agree. But he also is one who won't expand Medicaid in order to make more people, give more people access to mental health services. So even if you accept that solution that like we should focus more on mental health, they're just full of it. They're just completely bankrupt.
He was actually asked about that at the press conference.
Yeah,
He said he would reject the ACA Obamacare dollars.
Yeah, so I mean, they're just, all they want to do is like deflect, get through this time period when people feel the emotion in a really raw and visceral way, and then do nothing and, you know, pretend next time like they're really sad about it again.
Yeah, I mean, there's no question that he's absolutely full of it on that one in particular. The red flag law, I think this bears discussion. I mean, this is a really tricky one. So for example, like I don't know if I could support a red flag law for freedom of speech. And this is something which is also in our First Amendment, right? And the ability for an adjudicated state court process an adjudicated state with no due process in a court of law that can take away your freedom of speech.
How they are typically drawn up is that there is a process through a court of law. So it's a relatively onerous process. Now, of course, you can draw up these laws any number of ways. But, the well-written ones, that's effectively the process that is laid in place so that you do have some protection of your rights.
I just worry we're walking into a Patriot Act situation. I mean, looking here, the Florida red flag law has been used over 2,200 times since March of 2018 and just July of 2019. I mean, I'd have to review some of these cases. I just think that once you give these people the ability to infringe upon a constitutional right.
See, I don't accept that it's a totally the Constitution says a well-regulated militia. So I don't accept the framing that this is like some bedrock constitutional right with no potential boundaries or limits on it whatsoever.
Well, that's not up to us. It's up to the court, obviously. And I'm just going to say, I mean, if I look at it basically in the same vein, and within that, like, I think we should have an extraordinarily high barrier to entry. It's just difficult. I mean, in the words of these situations, in the context of these situations, I mean, we'll all remember Anwar al-Awlaki, who was the American citizen, who was killed by a U.S. drone strike ordered by the Obama administration. And that entire process, again, he did not actually have due process, and it was all adjudicated by the executive branch with some sign-off by some court, and there was never a jury of his peers that actually convicted him and sentenced him to death. So I just look at these things as a very slippery process when you—
But like, your right to not get murdered by a drone strike and your right to own any weapon that you want, I think are two—
It's not any weapon that you want. It's the ability to purchase any firearm. So we're not even talking about putting a restriction on an AR-15. We're talking about right in order to purchase any firearm, which is pretty well established in U.S. case law that you do have the ability in order to purchase it. This isn't just an AR-15. This is anything that he's able to buy.
Red flag laws are in place in something like 19 states, I believe.
Yeah, I'm reading about it
and
in front of us.
I mean, thus far, they've survived court challenges. So clearly, these can be written in a way that, based on our current, I think wrong body of work on judicial rulings on guns, but even within that framework, which is very pro-2A, they have allowed these red flag laws to stand. So listen, what I want to say here is that I don't think that there is any solution barring buying back all the guns and basically like getting rid of any guns, which is not going to happen, that is going to completely eliminate these types of horrific tragedies. Are there things we could do on the margins that would make it less likely? That would make it, not just looking at mass shootings, which comparatively are actually a small number of the amount of gun violence and deaths that we have in this country. Are there things we could do that could reduce the number of suicides, that could reduce the number of people who are murdered in, attacks by their spouse? Yeah, there are things that we could do. And so I just— I don't want to give up on the idea that there are some efforts that a lot of people agree with in this country that could be undertaken on a potentially bipartisan basis that at least would make it so there are fewer parents, family members, individuals who are devastated and grief-stricken because their loved one has been taken from them too soon.
I think the latter part is very important for everybody to understand. Some 70% odd percentage of the gun deaths in this country are suicide. And actually a leading cause of death of a lot of adolescent children is actually now guns. And part of the reason for that, domestic disturbance. I mean, a lot of this is, this is a mass shooting happening, on a broad scale nearly every day.
Yeah, that's right.
Whenever you consider it in, it's not as horrific. It's not somebody stopping in. It's, a child gets killed in the middle of a domestic altercation between a drunk husband and, his estranged wife, or, a girlfriend or somebody gets killed, despite having been beaten up like 3 or 4 times. This is actually far more common, even in terms of street homicide. Again, you're looking at something where vast majority of these guns are illegally obtained, even by the people who are using them. So it comes down to address, and I know it's almost a meme, it's like addressing the root cause.
Yeah.
But I think the mental health, Governor Abbott had the audacity really in order to be like, well, there's not a single mental health hospital, 40 miles or whatever within Uvalde. It's like, okay, well, build one then. This government is literally giving you money in order to use it, and you won't use it.
Right.
Like,
you're like, this is one of those things where you're like, if only someone in power cared about—
it's like,
you're the governor. You're literally the governor.
And that is where I would like a lot of focus on this to be.
Here I do want to say, because I was thinking about this a lot, people get, I think, justifiably very upset by those dodges from people like Abbott, who are like, let's just focus on the mental health and not talk about the guns. And we're going to talk later on, too, about some of the most deranged responses left and right. And a lot of the right ones are all about, like, let's not talk about guns whatsoever. Let's just focus on these other issues. The big thing now is, like, there should have only, Ted Cruz last night, we need to mandate there's only one door in schools. And anyway.
That doesn't sound like a bad idea.
Well, but then there's only one way to get out, too. And he only needed one door when you've got, 85 police officers standing around doing nothing. Anyway, I digress. I understand why people get upset when commentators and politicians want to say, let's just focus, let's just talk about the mental health, or we just need better Judeo-Christian values was another thing I heard yesterday. We've got to talk about these root causes, which it is true. I mean, there is a cultural issue here that is fueled by those root causes. But you just make yourself into like a liar and a fraud when you float something like mental health. But then even on that, you're not willing to actually do anything. So I do think the mental health issue is important. I don't think we should ignore it. I don't think we should only talk about it to the exclusion of everything else, including just these, basic things that you could do to try to curb gun violence on the margins. But the reality is, like, they're not even serious about that either. So the whole conversation just ends up being completely fraudulent. Cable news is ripping us apart, dividing the country, making it impossible to function as a society, and making it impossible to know just what is true and what is false. But the good news is they are failing and they know it.
That is why we're building something new, a new mainstream, a healthier one, something more trustworthy, something that we are going to need in one of the most pivotal times in American history. We are building up here for the midterms, for the upcoming presidential election, but we need your help. So if you can help us out by becoming a premium member today at breakingpoints.com, we're trying to change America for the better and the entire world.
So what are you waiting for, guys? Go to breakingpoints.com and sign up and help us build a new mainstream.